Hi, everyone. Welcome to the WARC podcast. My name is Rica Facundo, and I'm the Asia editor here at WARC Strategy. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic I'm sure you're going to be hearing a lot about this 2023, retail media. It's been called a lot of things, but one of those is the next big wave in digital advertising. We've reported about this quite a bit at WARC, but I'm super excited about today because what we're going to do is deep dive and unpack exactly what the retail media opportunity means in Asia. What does the regional landscape look like? How do you choose the right retail media network? What work still needs to be done to make sure that this market develops the way that it should in the next few years? To help me, I've brought in two experts who have recently launched a report about the state of retail media advertising in Southeast Asia. We have JJ Eastwood, Managing Director at Carousell Media Group, and we have Miranda Dimopoulos, Regional CEO at IAB Southeast Asia India, and the industry authority in all things digital. But I'm excited to have them here not just because they have such great industry expertise, they have a lot of market expertise. I think almost 20 years of experience, 40 years between the both of them. Definitely much older than I am here in the room. Welcome to you both.
Thanks for having us.
All right, I'm going to dive right in by throwing in some promising data points from your report. So it said that 87% of respondents say that they plan to use a retail media network in the next 12 months, and 88% are currently advertising on 1 to 3 media networks. Why is retail media having a moment right now? I mean, globally, sure, but why in Asia? I mean, Miranda, what are your thoughts on this, especially since you have the industry point of view in mind?
Look, I think it's simply because it works. I mean, if you look at the fact that 99% of respondents to our research said that they're increasing their spend on retail media networks in the future, that's incredibly high. And when you couple that with the fact that our respondents, 75%, were at that decision-making senior level, it's telling us that this is happening for a reason. And I think that this is because with retail media networks, what we're seeing is that they meet business and sales objectives easily because they're tapping straight into shopping behaviors. I mean, retail media networks allow brands to be visible at that lower part of the funnel where consumers are in buy mode. They're ready to purchase. And I think that what we've seen with the rise of e-commerce over the past couple of years, people have got into the habit of shopping online, or they're shopping online more. So if we take it all the way back to why is this working? I mean, marketers are always looking for ways to achieve both their brand and sales goals. And with retail media networks providing access to more effective targeting, personalization, localization, which is obviously super important across APAC with the language, cultural, religious differences we see country to country. What we're seeing is that this greater, better targeting and greater personalization and localization is stimulating greater creative and stronger messaging. So it's a win for brands, but it's also a win for consumers because you're seeing tailored and relevant ads at the point where you actually want to see them. And you're actually open to changing your mind. You might test a new brand. You might buy more of something you were planning on buying anyway. So rather than being what we sometimes see in advertising is kind of like a gimmicky new thing that we're told will be the next big thing, retail media networks have just been getting out there, creating effectiveness at scale.
You mentioned, because I always wonder when these big things happen is why now? What is it about this moment in time that is making everyone that you talk to think about retail media? You mentioned one, which is the pandemic, of course, ushered in a lot more e-commerce behaviors, but everyone also is talking about the economic climate at this point in time, a lot of the squeeze. How do you see that do you see that factoring into the emphasis that retail media is having right now in Asia and globally?
Yeah. Look, I certainly think that retail media offers efficiencies. It offers efficiencies on the operational side, so on the people who are making the retail media networks happen. But then it also offers efficiency in terms of the consumer and the purchases. And as we can talk about this a little bit more later, but we're not only seeing retail media networks happen in terms of the retailers themselves, but in terms of also the fulfillment and delivery side. They're also going to be building out their own media networks. And all of this passes on benefits in terms of better deals, lower costs to the consumer. So whenever we're facing fears and the challenges of economic downturn, this is what people will go out there and hunt for. And when you can hunt for it in the comfort of your own home, either on your laptop or on your mobile phone, that just means that we're going to see people spend more.
I think from your answer, it's obvious that consumers are flocking there, that maybe the infrastructure is starting to develop. And when there's opportunity there, of course, people can smell it. A lot of people enter the market. So I kind of want to spend the next maybe 10 minutes or so understanding exactly the landscape right now. What are the types of retail media networks in Asia? What makes retail media networks different in Southeast Asia compared to China and the West? And I've got to throw this question to you, JJ, since, of course, Carousell Media is one of the leading retail media networks in the region. Give us a down low on the different types of retail media networks.
Yeah, certainly. I think maybe just to take a step back, it seems like we're having a big moment and retail media is this new thing. If you think back, retail media has really been around since the dawn of supermarkets, and it's been predominantly in store. And it's really with e-commerce that this new retail media, what we're talking about today, has emerged. And I think why it's so pressing in this moment is that in Q1 in 2022, Amazon for the first time released their ad numbers, and so did Walmart. And people were kind of blown away. There's a $40 billion ad business at Amazon that was just a line item on their P&L as other. And in addition to that, then you got Walmart. But if you look at the region and you look at how things are different, it's quite interesting because China's certainly leading the way. Around 40% of the ad market is made up from retail media. Contrast that with the US, it's only 14.5. So they're multiple times bigger in terms of the US. Southeast Asia is, I would argue, still in its infancy. Around 11% of the ad spend in this region is on the retail media networks. And we don't just have those big sort of multi-country platforms like we do have in either China or in the US. I think what we're seeing here is it's a little bit fragmented. We've got different players who offer different propositions for brands. So in the US, Walmart do a great job with the FMCG category. There's no one really owning that in this region just yet. Grab kind of makes sense working with the likes of Coca-Cola when people are buying Grab food. Food Panda have a play there too. But we haven't seen any of the big supermarket chains getting heavily involved. FairPrice are doing some stuff with the trade desk, but that's all kind of off platform. And if you consider the $100 billion retail media network or retail media revenue that's been quoted as the current global ad spend, 90% of that actually comes from what we call sponsored product ads, and they happen on platform. So we don't have any big players doing that in this region just yet for FMCG. That's kind of where we play in the electronics, in the fashion, in the furniture type angle. But a very diverse global market with various stages of, I'd say various stages of advancements.
It's so interesting when you say that. Retail media is still in its infancy in Southeast Asia compared to the other markets. And of course, one of the points of this podcast is to kind of see how we can grow it, kind of get a sense of what it could look like. And I always find that the region is in this weird in-between space between, do I follow the model of China or do I follow the model of the US? It's some kind of mishmash of both. I'm going to ask you to put your predictive hat on, look into your crystal ball, JJ. If you could pick some features maybe from the West or from China that you think retail media in Southeast Asia could grow into, what could it be?
Yeah, well, I think today at this moment, Southeast Asia is definitely leaning towards China in terms of the way this market is evolving. The reason being, it's a much more mobile-centric market. And if I look at some of the global players who are offering solutions for publishers, traditionally they haven't been thinking mobile first. So they still have that kind of Western perspective. So I think that if you look at the big players in this region, like for example, Grab are a big player, Foodpanda are a big player. They're all app first. Carousell, 80% of our inventory is in-app as well. So I think we're definitely leaning towards the China model. Whether or not Southeast Asia will get to that 40% of ad spend over the next 5 years or not will be interesting, because that means it will be growing much faster than the predicted growth in North America.
I'm so glad that you mentioned mobile and super apps. See, predictive hat, because that is going to be the next question I was going to ask you, because of course, the one thing that we all know about this region, dominated by super apps, mobile first. And this question is for Miranda. How does the fact that it's mobile first or super apps change the dynamics of retail media advertising in this region?
I don't know if it changes things, but what I think is that it gives better access and the ability to capture more consumer behavior data. And if we take it all the way back, I mean, retail media is really about being where people are shopping, whether it's online, whether it's on their phone, whether or not it's in store. And we're seeing such a rapid growth of this, of retail media, because of really three key things. And it's the inventory they have. So it's that ability for brands to reach consumers at that point of consideration. As I mentioned before, they're in shopping mode and they're a click or two away from purchasing. And also because of, that being more app-based, the data that these networks have in this region is just phenomenal. It's mind-blowing. And it's everything from basket size, buying behaviors, the amount of consumer shopping and behavioral habits that are being captured is simply more than you'll capture on the web. And so, looking across multiple categories and multiple services that you tend to have within, especially the super apps, the insights and behaviors is an absolute goldmine.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, really like the sheer amount of data, because by nature consumers are using their mobile for everything, is one of the main advantages that mobile first retail media networks can give. Interesting. So go ahead, Mark.
Absolutely. Yeah, sorry, and it's not just what you're putting out there. It's also the ability to bring it back to your business goals. Retailers, and brands, you can close the loop when it comes to attribution and measurement and understanding impact. Everything from Omnichannel, which we hear so much about now, especially transactional behaviors. How many new buyers have you attracted? So I think that what we're also seeing is not only access to a wealth of data, but the ability to understand what is the impact of the advertising that you're putting out to these audiences.
I have so many follow-ups on data, which we'll talk about a little bit later, because, we don't have a problem with too much data these days. It's about what you do with the data, but let's chat about that a little bit later. But so like I said earlier, there's a lot of competition right now in the retail media network space. And, you have the people who are there first, like Carousell is one of those, but then you have everyone else who wants to cash in, and maybe even those where marketers usually get the digital ad dollars, such as your Googles and your Metas and whatnot. So, JJ, what do you see retail media offering that other channels don't? And actually, on the flip side as well, what is something retail media can't do? I mean, love possibilities, but some guardrails would be good too.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll start off with what they can't do, and it kind of leads into some of the strengths. People will go to social media for inspiration. I think retail media networks will kind of struggle with that inspiration a little bit. There's no way they're going to compete with the likes of Instagram or Pinterest or even Facebook in that way. But then what you do have is you got people on retail media network who are actively shopping. And you're, as Miranda kind of pointed out, they're that one click away from a purchase. They're that one step further down the funnel than they would be perhaps on another kind of platform. With that said, then the kind of proof in the pudding is two things. We have to perform. Like, the performance has to be there in order for any retail media network to be successful. And then I think one of the things that's kind of coupled and related to that is the ability to scale. I think eMarketer in the US sort of had a quote that any retail media network that's got the possibility of being successful would have to have roughly around 10 million monthly active users. So that's kind of quite a high benchmark for some players.
I don't know if this is a bit of a cheeky follow-up, but I'm going to ask it anyway. But you mentioned that the one thing retail media might not be able to do compared to other platforms is in the discovery, maybe inspiration phase. But I've also been hearing the opposite, where platforms that were used to just be conversion, people are starting to use it for discovery and inspiration. Or maybe, is that a specific use case within retail media, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, let's just go back to that. If we follow the money, as I mentioned before, 90% of retail media networks' revenue comes from sponsored product ads, and that's directly tapping into what people are searching for. So generally, at this point in time, the vast majority of retail media networks, what they're offering is comparable products or exact products that people are searching for, which isn't really inspiring them. We know what these people want. Whereas you go onto a social feed, and quite often you'll get enticed by a product that you were like passively consuming. You weren't searching for that at all, and all of a sudden you see a nice pair of shoes, and you thought, my wardrobe's full of shoes. The last thing I need is another pair of shoes. Said no woman ever, I don't think.
I was going to say, I don't think Miranda and I are both like, that's not true.
Miranda's rolling her eyes. Okay. But so retail media is not going to do that. We're tapping into what people are explicitly searching for.
All right, and then for Miranda, question for you. Again, because as JJ said, we're still in the nascent stages of retail media in Asia. What kind of new retail media brands or networks you might see emerging in the future? Is it more niche? Is it a bit more regional? What are your thoughts?
That is such an amazing question. And I think that what I see happening is what emerges will come from a few different areas. I think number one will be the number of retailers that we see come on board with their own offering, with their own app. But where it starts to get really interesting is what are the data partnerships that are going to be formed? Because traditionally, a lot of these retailers simply don't have the internal capabilities to go from being a retailer to a retail media network. And the fastest way to do this is through very, very smart data partnerships that allow them to tap into DSPs and scale much, much faster. But an area that I also think we may see a lot of action in is around consolidation. Because think of it, put yourself in the shoes of the marketer or the agency planner. You don't want to be dealing with 10, 15, 20 retail media network interfaces. So what consolidation will we see, particularly around the region, so that you can activate audiences multi-market within a single entry point? So will we see, Fair Price partner with, supermarkets in other countries in Asia? Like, how is that all going to work out? Because when it comes down to it, we have to make life easy for the people who are spending the money on the advertisements. And then with that evolution, when you talk about niche audiences, retail media networks are perfect for this. I believe I've seen through working on, this is now our third research project with Carousell and getting to understand their brand and their offering more. They already have niche platforms which cater to sneakerheads, which cater to people who are focused only on luxury. And if we then look at being at a more nascent stage in Southeast Asia, looking at the track record of the US, what we have seen is that these retail media networks evolved quite quickly. So a specific example is the Walmart Media Group. When they originally launched their retail media network, it was as a managed service. But then they realized that by partnering with the trade desk and allowing brands to self-serve, that they would be able to grow much more quickly. And so if we think about this research study that we're releasing and talking about now, tells us that 1 in 5 ad dollars will be spent on retail media networks in the next 12 months. What this means is that these retail media networks have access to new revenue streams. And what these new revenue streams will do is it allows them, it increases their ability to invest in improving their own offering, as well as investing in these new partnerships and data partnerships that will allow them to be more effective. So I think predicting we're going to see better partnerships. Potentially we're going to see greater consolidation and access. And then also I think that we're going to see a growth of niche platforms around really people who are really passionate about sort of that one thing.
So what I'm hearing from both of you is we've gone from really lots of great opportunity. There's still some work to be done, data partnerships, making sure you have the infrastructure and whatnot. So what will separate the winners from the losers? Because not all retail media networks are born equal. And JJ, again, since you are a retail media network have maybe had a head start in this space, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think I might sound a little bit like a broken record, but I think the core competency of a retail media network is definitely going to be that the search, and being able to offer brands the ability to tap into what people are organically searching for on their platform. And that can be for both endemic and non-endemic. So endemic brands makes complete sense. I'm a mobile phone handset provider, and I want to target any more people who are searching certain types of mobile handsets. That's very straightforward. But I think one of the big opportunities for retail media globally, not just in this region, is actually the non-endemic brands coming onto these platforms. So the banks, the insurance companies, QSR, restaurants, etc. And I think for those non-endemic brands is for them to think about how can they be creative in tapping into what people are searching for. I can give you quite a good example of this. We work with an insurance company in Singapore, and they wanted to be creative about how to tap into what people are searching for. So what we did is we looked at what were the top 3 keyword searches on Carousell, and this was in October last year. I think number 1 was iPhone 13. Number 2 was those Brompton bikes, which are super popular at the moment. And then the third one was Nintendo Wii, I think on the lead up to Christmas. A lot of people are going to get that from Santa. And so what Prudential then did was take those 3 products and create a prize draw around it. Again, super successful campaign, because they were creatively thinking about how do we tap into what people actually want. So I think that's going to be an interesting paradigm shift for non-endemic brands whenever they want to come onto these platforms.
That's a great segue into the next thing I want to talk about, which is kind of the loosely calling the brand and retail media network fit, because it sounds like a lot of partnerships need to be involved in making sure that this is an effective strategy for everyone. And JJ, if I can stay with you, what does retail media provide for brands? And on the flip side, what does retail media provide for retailers?
Yeah, so let's start with the brands. A couple of things which Miranda touched on It's still in its early stages, but really big opportunity, and that will be data collaborations. It's probably the best way to put it. Let's take, for example, an FMCG business. If you think traditionally, a lot of their customers will transact in store. They don't have a lot of information about their customers. They might have quite extensive databases, but they need to enrich that data. And that's where a retail media network can come in. Obviously, we need some kind of connected pipes like a DMP, for example, where we can come together and anonymously in a brand safe type way and privacy compliant type way, and we can merge the databases and then enrich what we know about our individual users. So let's say, for example, with Carousell, we're talking to some airlines, and they know that a given user might be going to Japan, and we'll be able to tell them, yes, well, they've just bought salopettes on a snowboard as well. So, being able to enrich each other. And I think that's a really big opportunity for brands, in addition to the performance, obviously, selling more products.
The other thing I want to bring up in this kind of collaboration between these different partners, and this came from the report that you guys did, was about values. So, of course, retail media is always talked about in terms of the money, which is, of course, important. But there was an interesting statistic that said that 44% of respondents say that they will advertise on a retail media network, even if they don't have any products listed on that marketplace. Can you, Miranda, can you elaborate a little bit more about that finding? What are those considerations?
Look, I think that JJ's touched on this briefly, which was around non-endemic brands. So I think if we split this response into two parts, the first is building on non-endemic brands. I think that these are certainly considered one of the biggest opportunities for retail media networks. And in terms of growth, if Asia follows global trends where non-endemic brands sit at around 10% of the spend in this space, it means that there's loads of room to increase. And why we're seeing this is just through the buying behaviors that you get access to, you can spot when someone is at a major life stage. So whether or not it is you've just had your first child, or you're preparing for the birth of a child, to buying a home, to getting married, these indicators allow non-endemic brands to target you with try to sell you a bigger car, or sell you home insurance or honeymoon destinations. So I think that that's one side of things. But where we're seeing is another growth area, which is where where brands have the opportunity to align their company values and their company ethics with retail media networks that support those. So, for example, if we are to look at Carousell as a platform, over the past 2 years, our research reports, one focused, first in 2021, focused on the buying behaviors of millennials and Gen X. And then last year, we focused more on shopping trends, particularly in relation to sustainability. And what these two research projects told us was that even though ease of use, good deals, and easy price comparisons are huge drivers for consumers to buy, we saw a massive shift in 2022, which said that 55%, more than half of the respondents across the region said that they are shopping sustainably because they're driven by concerns about climate change and environmental impact. And what we saw was that if we look at Singapore alone, 9 out of 10 Singaporeans are willing to pay a premium for ethically sourced or produced goods. And if you are a brand that sells ethically sourced or produced goods, then that makes it a very strong match in terms of what the brand is selling and what the consumer audience is buying.
I mean, Miranda, you mentioned a carousel, but I'd also, maybe you took the words out of JJ's mouth, but I'd also love to hear from you, JJ. I mean, Miranda's kind of talked about it from, from a consumer point of view, where there's an appetite, for example, to buy more sustainable products. But when brands are choosing to partner with you, and the fact that you are a re-commerce platform, sustainability is in your ethos, is that a big consideration for brands?
Yeah, it is. Obviously, people know that Carousell's been at the heart of the circular economy in Singapore for the last 10 years. And we have been working with a number of brands. We've been working with the Singapore government and the SG Green Plan. We've been working with some banks who are producing credit cards made out of recycled plastic. But I think it's actually a little bit of a misnomer to think that people only come to Carousell to shop sustainably and to buy second-hand goods. The vast majority of people actually come to Carousell to get a good deal. And that's really where we're working with brands. We were speaking to someone who makes bikes. I actually got quite a wide array of goods, but one of the things that they do is very cost-effective bicycles. Super popular on Carousell, obviously. And they were saying to us, it makes sense for us to be on Carousell because our products are at a price point that they're probably just in line with a 1 or 2 year old Trek or Giant or Specialized bike. So when a consumer comes onto the platform, perhaps they're searching for a Trek or a Specialized that at a good deal, maybe it's 1 year old. But they're able to get this product brand new. So that's the way the brands kind of are thinking about the Carousell group is, 50% of the products that are sold on our platform are brand new. So it's actually, thinking about how do we offer people value for money, particularly when they're searching for high-end goods, and we might have a comparable alternative that might be more cost-effective.
All right, so now we've talked about the ecosystem and partnerships, and I want to now deep dive into something we started talking a little bit about earlier, which is data, which leads into conversation about measurement and analytics. And again, I'm going to throw in another interesting statistic from the report, which is that 91% of respondents said that proper measurement of marketing outcomes is the biggest challenge for advertisers today. And you can't talk about measurement without transparency and data. And we talked about this notion of partnerships kind of as a sub-thread throughout this conversation, but specifically on data and analytics, JJ, how do you see kind of brands and retailers and advertisers working better together to fight the fraud on analytics? And can you give any specific examples?
Yeah, I think a really great example is perhaps what FairPrice are doing with the trade desk at the moment. That's certainly a data play, being able to target their consumers in the open internet using the insights of what people have been buying in order to build segments. It's certainly something that we do. I give the example of the airline before. If you think about one of the unique aspects of Carousell is the fact we've got both buying and selling signals, so you can quite easily identify the lifestyle stage that people are at. If people are buying books around babies, we know that they're about to have a baby. Conversely, if they're selling their cribs, that the kids are getting a little bit older, so on and so forth. And we've got the longitude, latitude coordinates of where the mobile phones. We know where people will traditionally want to pick up items, so we've got a really strong sense of are these people at university or are they young adults. So the opportunity, kind of like what I mentioned with the airline, is really working with brands on how do our data sets complement each other and how can we enrich them, and then what's the best way to activate them. So they might come to us and simply say, hey, listen, we want to target all of these users. How many of them can we see on your platform? So we can see a couple of million of them. Great, but what if we were to open that up to the open internet as well? Or they might say to us, hey, listen, we want to target all of these users. Can you identify that they've bought, say, a car, for example, in the last 30 days? We enrich that data. But we want to target them when they're on connected TV. And then we can make that data collaboration available in a DSP, and then they can target those users on a connected TV with a much more tailored offer. I think what's going to be really interesting is whenever we get further down into the weeds a little bit, and we're able to retarget people if they haven't bought, not just in the traditional fashion of retargeting where we serve them an ad with the product that they hadn't bought that's been around forever, but it would be really cool if we can then serve them an ad. Say, for example, they're shopping online in the morning, they put a couple of things in the basket, and then we can serve them an ad from that brand later on, a video ad when they're in a more immersive environment, like watching connected TV, for example.
I'm going to stay with you a little bit, JJ, because it's clear the benefits of sharing data. You said have to have complementary data sets, but sometimes people don't want to share. There's usually a lot of awareness and maybe issues of trust that maybe historically have been there. How do you get to that win-win? How do you enable that trust so that people will share the data with each other for a partnership? What were some of the problems before that prevented people from doing that?
There's various levels of sharing. So yeah, I think people have become, or brands and marketers have been very used to, let's say, for example, custom audiences on Facebook. That's just become the norm these days, and it's almost like table stakes. So retail media networks have to have some way to facilitate that. There's a lot of talk about clean rooms. So what I'm sort of talking about at the moment is something similar to a clean room. One of the challenges, one of the kind of perhaps sticking points, is that we have to agree on a neutral third-party provider that we're both working with. There are only a couple in the region, but that will be a sticking point. We both have to be working with the same independent third party in order for those collaborations to happen, because it's very unlikely that we would talk to a brand and they would go and implement a full CDP or DMP just to run sort of some kind of campaign. That's never going to happen. But if the hard work's already been done, they've identified a vendor, they've got all of their data in that vendor already, then they will actively be seeking partners. And if we're there too, it's like, you sort of marry them up. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done prior to these data collaborations. But I think once all that work has been done and everybody's comfortable with the privacy and compliance and all of that, these partnerships are relatively easy to facilitate.
You mentioned a word there, marriage. In a previous conversation, someone talked about partnerships being a marriage, and you said third party. In my head, I was thinking, you need a minister of retail media networks to facilitate before the contract is signed. Well, speaking of contract, again, with data and measurement, is there a stat, like it comes to, again, at WARC, we're always trying to understand the murkiness of media metrics and whatnot. So Miranda, again, as an industry body, how do you see those standards developing in Asia? Are you seeing a movement towards universal KPIs?
Another great question. And just to kind of add a bit of a personal context to this conversation here is, over the past 3 years, my role has changed dramatically in terms of government advisory. As the IAB across the region, we've always had a played a fantastic consultative role. We were brought in here and there to give our perspective, and our regional board regularly connects with different government sectors. But particularly in the last 3 years, this has been amped up, because what we are seeing is a lot of advancement in terms of policy development. But the challenge that we face in Southeast Asia and India is that each country operates completely independently when it comes to legislation. There is no cohesion whatsoever. We have mature media markets such as Singapore, which has had data policies for a number of years. However, across the rest of the region, this is in varying states of creation, development, redrafting. And then layering on top of this, the explosion of e-commerce due to the pandemic, I'm hoping that what we will see is policy creation and development and redrafting moving a lot faster. And our role as the IAB, and to be honest, quite often the only association in the room as these conversations that are happening, is that we are able to speak with one voice on behalf of all of our members. So we represent partners and competitors. We have that one consistent perspective, which I also think is really important. Because when we look at legislation development, look at the US. I mean, should we really look at the US for guidance on anything? But if we look at the US, that is a single domestic mature advertising market, and they're going down a state-by-state legislation path at the moment. Can you imagine if that was to happen across Southeast Asia and India, where you not only had country legislation, but then, that was then split out even further? It would just be chaotic to manage as businesses, but chaotic to implement as well. And I think that universal KPIs at this stage are a nirvana state. I think that it's going to be challenging until we see more consistency across the countries in Southeast Asia and India, and then that consistency matches up with what we're seeing in the West. And this is part of this is kind of why I have a presentation that I've done quite a lot in the US, and it's actually called Asia is Not Country. And that's simply because when we're having these discussions, if you are a marketer in this region, it's second nature to us. We understand the level of how you can't just roll out one thing. We are always revising, adapting, re-strategizing, localizing. That is just built into our plans. But when you have these conversations with people who perhaps aren't familiar with this region, it's completely foreign to them. And to bring this back to the role that we play as the IAB is that ability to, at least from an understanding, a messaging and an advisory perspective, we are that one clear, consistent voice.
So Miranda, you're a minister in some shape or form, is it?
I feel like should I be ordained as a retail media network minister?
Maybe, but I mean, I hear you. Fragmentation and diversity is what we're infamous for, and yes, universal KPIs seems to be quite a far-reaching possibility that we can try and work towards. But if I stay in that space of like maybe what's possible now that wasn't before, because we spent quite a bit of time talking about some of the challenges, but I'd love to end this podcast on a more optimistic note, I suppose. And again, throwing back one of the statistics that came from your report. And the reason why, people were interested in retail media is because, or 82% of people rather, is it because it provides all of this insight and data to the category, audience, and whatnot. And I said this earlier, just because you have access to data, it's about what you do with it, right? And so JJ, again, being the person who represents the retailer and brand relationship, what are some of the key challenges that retailers and brands face in turning data into actionable insights?
I think maybe just what I touched on before is actually having the data organized somewhere where the brand and the retailer can collaborate, because when it's in silos, it's actually very difficult to activate. So that's step one: CDP, DMP, some sort of platform that they can both agree on. And perhaps there's going to be some retailers that are building out their own solutions. Of course, the likes of Amazon's are. I think that's kind of step one. And then the step two is like, okay, well, how can we activate this data? Is it only available, appended to the retailer's on-site inventory, or can we use this off-platform? And I think that's one of the biggest trends and probably one of the biggest opportunities to kind of spin this around, going from challenges. If we go back to the report, 78% of the respondents said that they were looking to activate the retail media data off platform. Particularly, I think around 55% of them said that they wanted to use it in connected TV, as it's one of the most fastest growing mediums across the region. Particularly if you look at countries like Vietnam, where they probably have some of the highest connected TV rates in the world. So that's a super interesting trend. I think the devil will be in the details. How do we action this? Can we all agree on which platforms to use and agree on which platforms we will allow the brands to activate the data from?
I think the other kind of opportunity that I saw from the report in terms of data is about with Omnichannel. Omnichannel, again, is another big or key priority for marketers now. And then 68% from your survey said that they can now have data from retail media to optimize cross-channel campaigns. And of course, again, this is the holy grail, right? But how far are we? Is it still nirvana? I think Miranda used that word earlier. Is it a little bit closer than that? How near or far is retail media in providing that missing link, Miranda?
Look, I think it's closer than we think. And I think that this is because we're already seeing really strong examples of omnichannel via retail media networks being successful. We can look at Woolworths in Australia. We've talked about Walmart in the US. We've talked about in Singapore what Fair Price and the Trade Desk are doing really well. And I think that as we see more retail media networks and data partnerships or data collaborations, as JJ likes to call them, that it's these success stories of cross-channel campaigns that prove that these impactful formats, that great creative messaging and stories, that you can be personalized and localized, that you can make the most of things that make Southeast Asia and India, that make the region so dynamic across the different festivals. These are the things that drive engagement and conversion. And these are the case studies that convince marketers to invest more. But I also think that what we're seeing with cross-channel success is that moving retail media, as it's discussed a lot, including by myself on this podcast, is that it sits at that lower funnel at that point of purchase. But through cross-channel campaigns, we're going to see it just move further and further up the funnel.
All right, I have maybe last two questions. I know we can spend a lot of time talking about retail media, but again, Miranda famously said that the region is infamous about being fragmented. We talked about it from a policy standpoint, but even from a scaling standpoint. So in terms of data, can retail media help solve historical challenges such as providing cross-border data and insights so that brands can scale across the region? JJ, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that we've been working with brands on. We have around 50 million monthly active users across the region. A big chunk of our users would be around 19 million in Vietnam. And we have brands that we work with who maybe based out of Singapore, but running a campaign across Malaysia and Hong Kong. We've had brands in Hong Kong who want to tap into the Singapore market and kind of expand out a little bit. So certainly there are a number of brands who want to run multi-market campaigns. Again, that's relatively easily facilitated if the retail media network is in those countries across the region.
All right. We've come, unfortunately, to the end of our podcast. But before we go, again, like I said earlier, we're still in the nascent stages. How do we then grow? So if you could each pick just one area that we should concentrate on to move the needle, what would it be? Let's start with Miranda.
So as the IAB, as the Industry Association for Digital, I can talk about how we're responding. And that's simply one of our kind of core pillars, the foundations of our organisation, is around our specialist regional councils. And this is where we bring together regional directors to create original content that looks at the current, sort of state of play. What is the current landscape? Looking at the future, how to prepare for the future. And this content that we create for the industry has led to our website with zero media behind it, because we are a non-profit, gets over 120,000 visitors a month. But I'm giving you all of these amazing insights and stats for a reason, and that is the way that we're responding to retail media and how we can help mature the market is that we're creating a retail media council this year, and we are creating a community of practitioners and experts so that they can also sort of provide that advice, counsel, help inform the industry on how to make the most of retail media networks. And not only that, we're also going to connect with retail media groups from IABs around the world. So, for example, they exist in the US, the UK. I know Australia's looking at that as well. And I think that the more information that we can provide that is Asia first, Asia relevant, will really will help those who are curious, sitting on the fence, or just don't know where to start.
Music to my ears, Asia first content and insights. JJ, yourself?
Yeah, it's interesting. If you had asked me this question prior to this research, I probably would have, give some sort of sales pitch on why retail media is a fantastic example for a fantastic opportunity for brands. But when we got the data back, like 99% of respondents said they're going to spend more on retail media. And job done. I can throw the sales pitch out the window. I think it's really about how do we make things effective, and how do we evolve the market and talk about much more sophisticated things rather than just the product search ads, which are going to be the core of retail media. Certainly a big focus for us over the next 12 months. But then how do we have these data collaborations? How do we activate the data and be able to target users in these new mediums that are kind of beyond the traditional retail walls is going to be probably the biggest opportunity this year and beyond.
Thanks, JJ. You've said another word that's music to my ears. As you know, WARC is all about effectiveness. On that note, if you're interested in learning more about retail media, you can listen to other episodes in our WARC podcast where we cover retail media globally as well as in different markets, or you can download the report on www.iabseaindia.com. Thanks for listening, everyone.